Good morning, and what I want to do today is to rehearse for you the case for why you need nuclear power generation inside any energy mix, and also bring you up to date with what has been happening in the United Kingdom as far as nuclear generation is concerned and a new program of nuclear new build. Now, I appreciate that a lot of the things I say you'll be familiar with, but I think it's very important to remind ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing. Secondly, I hope that you'll be able to see some lessons that have been learned, and that will be particularly the case for in terms of what the previous speaker spoke, because we've been going through in Britain exactly all of those processes for a nuclear rebuild that were identified by the previous speaker. So let's see what the reasons, the case really is. And I want to put it into a context for you, because this is something we're going to be living with. Well, perhaps I'm not going to be living with, because I'll probably be dead by the end of this. But the whole of the society is going to be living with. So first of all, let's remind ourselves, we're going to have a massive increase in population by 2050. We're going to have about a 50% increase from 6 billion to 9 billion people. And that's mainly going to occur in Africa, India, China, and South America. Now, all of those people are going to need food, they're going to need water, they're going to need energy. All of those needs are going to increase dramatically over the next 30 years. And energy is particularly important in all of that, because it's at the heart of also ensuring food and water supplies. So there's an inevitability that we're going to use more and more energy. At the present moment, most of it comes from fossil fuels. And it's always, I like to give numbers to go along with this. You know, every year we're putting somewhere like, or last year we put up 35 billion tons of carbon dioxide up into the upper atmosphere. And that's an increase over 2011. So we're not pulling down the carbon dioxide emissions in our current scheme of things. And let me remind you that 1 gigawatt of power from a fossil fuel, a coal-fired power station, produces in a year 6.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. So if you think of waste and what you're doing with waste, the biggest waste depository in the world, on this planet, is the upper atmosphere. And that's actually what we believe is causing us lots and lots of problems. And remember, we've got to double or treble the amount of energy that we're going to produce in the next 35 years. So we're all familiar with the worries about the climate, I think. But we must keep on reminding ourselves, particularly as we heard often in a lot of talks yesterday, the current dash for gas, that's actually will keep on producing CO2. And it will keep on increasing these greenhouse gases that we're emitting. Those greenhouse gases, as we know, give us a mechanism, a scientific mechanism for global warming and climate change. And moreover, not just climate temperature increase, but variabilities of the climates. And we've just come in Europe from I have come from a very peculiar winter that's existed there. It's been a very cold one of the coldest ones on record. The other important thing to remember is that what we do today is going to affect the next 40 or 50 years, because that CO2 stays up there for the order of 50 years. And so whatever we're doing, we're really laying up a tremendous legacy, not a very happy legacy for future generations. Furthermore, it's not just what you do in South Africa or you do in the United Kingdom or you do in China. What we do everywhere affects everybody, because it gets distributed around in the atmosphere. So we've all got to find some very clear international solutions to this problem. And it's a problem, as I want to emphasize, is going to be with us for quite a while to come. Now, what in going forward is the responsibility of governments with this increase in energy that we've got to produce? Well, they've got to make sure there's enough energy, first of all, and ensure that the industry that's around will produce enough energy. They've got to make sure that that supply of energy is secure. It will keep on working because everybody expects, as we all do here, to plug into the wall socket and we get electricity to come out of it. So in order to get that security of supply, it's, to me, and I think to everybody here, and the last speaker particularly, you want a diverse set of sources. You also want to make sure that those ways of generating that energy are safe, that they don't damage the environment, they don't damage people, they don't kill people. And moreover, you'd like to make sure that the supply is sustainable, hence all of our interests in renewables. And then finally, that supply of energy, you want to be clean. You want to make sure that it's not pushing this CO2 up. And that's going to probably be an even bigger increase in the future when you convert a lot of activities to being supported by electricity. So it is going to be an enormous market going forward. Now, the first comment I want to make is that you can't do all of that without doing a lot of research and development. Therefore, that's vital to underpin anything anybody wants to do. They've got to do research and development. There's got to be big research and development programs. I believe, and I'll show you why we believe that in Britain, is that nuclear generation of electricity is an essential part of this the set of diverse sources and as you saw in the last talk here in South Africa, people believe that it's an important part of their mix of energy generation. And to put this all in perspective, just looking at what might be a nuclear electricity component of this, worldwide, this is about a turnover of about $1 trillion per year. So when we talk of $1 billion investment or so, this is tiny, particularly given the lifetimes of power stations and production, compared with what the actual turnover is going to be in the electricity and the energy market. So those are some of the backgrounds. So let me turn first of all to the economics of this. Let me put you in perspective. We in Britain, and I'm going to talk now about nuclear, but positioning it for a moment with respect to other sources. We in Britain built our last nuclear power station in late 1980s. So it's more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, since we built a nuclear power station in Britain. That's one of the issues that's now having to be addressed. And in that time, a lot of capability was lost. So, looking to the various ways of producing energy. Here in this, you see the various sorts of power that we could get in Britain. Remember, photovoltaics solar power is not such an attractive thing in Britain. There's not so much blue sky and not so much sunshine. So the big, The big things that feature in all of this are clearly the fossil fuels, because they're going to be with us for a while, and nuclear, and then various wind is very popular, and there are probably in here some tidal activities. Now what you see here is an analysis that was done by our Department of Energy and Climate Change to work out the comparative costs of all of these things for Britain. And that's going to be different from different countries, so everybody has to do this analysis themselves. But you can see it broken down into these various cost areas. And you can see, for instance, that nuclear has got an enormous capital investment to begin with and very small running costs compared with a combined cycle gas station, which has got small capital costs and large running costs. And there's an attempt here to include the cost of carbon, this emission around the atmosphere. And also in here, you can see, first of all, that there should be things about looking at carbon capture and sequestration. Now, for instance, if you're going to use fossil fuels, you really need to do the research and development work on that. Nobody has a carbon capture system at all of any size that's going to be of use to us in going forward. That needs a lot of R&D. Now, in the case of the nuclear here, you can see that this comparative look at all the various things brings it in at a cost that is comparable with the gas sources that we would use in Britain, and I think we will have to use to deal with shortages that are going to come on. Here you see this is a cost for a first of a kind, as it's called, because this will be the first new big nuclear reactor that's been built in Britain, and will therefore incur a lot of extra costs. And therefore it is expected, as we go and build more reactors into the future, then those costs will drop. So there will be they will become somewhat cheaper. But you do have to include that sort of thing to give an idea of where you are. But looking at all of these things, you see that a number of them at this sort of level here are comparable. And they're the ones that you will see in your mix in the future to ensure that you get this diversity. Now, the second thing about these power stations, and I should put it in perspective, in Britain at the moment we have about 16, 17 gigawatts of electricity from nuclear power generation. And that is all the reactors are going to be decommissioned by 2023, except for one. That, therefore, means there's got to be a big replacement program. So, the second thing you look at here is what are called the system costs, which make you appreciate just how difficult oops, I'm sorry, I keep on getting the wrong one. How difficult you have to do to have a reliable supply of electricity when you have these intermittent supplies that you have here, whereas these are much more stable, base load type of production. So adding these to the grid actually leads you into extra expenses that have not been included in those initial levelized costs for producing the electricity. Here is a longer term view, taking you out to 2030 of the various costs of these various areas. Here, gas with carbon capture and sequestration, coal with that, nuclear, and then the various, in this case, activities inside Britain. And you can see the attraction for us of wind, particularly onshore wind. So these numbers, these prices are going to be comparable as one goes out in time. Now, all of that adds up to, I think, the fact that we're going to have nuclear power, and we should have nuclear power in this mix. And you'll see there are some other factors which are important for it. Now, is it likely that this is going to happen? And I think we'll see in a moment it will be. It's going to occur mainly in the countries that have already got big nuclear reactor fleets, because they will come to the end of their life and they will have to be replaced. It will also occur mainly in the South and East Asia, especially in China and India, which have enormous power needs. It's basically going to be built around the sort of reactors that we have at the present time, light water reactors, thermal reactors. Eventually, those reactors may be replaced by reactors which work on a closed fuel cycle, not an open fuel cycle. Closed fuel cycle meaning that you take this used fuel and you reprocess it and you keep on reusing it. But that needs a different type of fleet of reactors that are under research and development now. And have been for a long while, so ones are getting very close to having ones that can be seriously deployed. The reason for doing that is the sustainability issue, and that's because there, at the moment, we take very little power out of the kilogram of uranium that's mined. If you reuse it, you can get, with these other reactors, you can get up to 50 or 60 times the current energy out of that kilogram of uranium. So this turns, if you believe you have a lifetime of 100 years or 150 years with the uranium you know about, then you've turned that suddenly into the order of 1,000 years at expected usage rates. Now, the other thing that happened in the recent past, you're all familiar with it, was the very, very sad disaster that occurred in Fukushima from the tsunami there. In Britain, and I speak that as a case example, before Fukushima, the support for the new nuclear build was high, is greater than 50% in the population in all polls that were taken. It dropped immediately after Fukushima, but is now returned to the same and even greater levels of public support for building a new set of nuclear reactors. So let's just look at these for a moment. Here you see the comment where the red is where all the reactors are, the green where the uranium resources are. You can see the reactors are concentrated in Western Europe and in North America. This is where the changes are expected to occur in the next 30 years, up until 2030, sorry. And you can see again that the main build is, as I said, down here in Asia and in China and in India particularly, as they have enormous demands on energy. So that, I think, is carrying on now, maybe a bit slower pace, but it is actually carrying on in the way that expected. And then you can see how you can get up to these very high amounts of energy that we'll need by 2050. There are various studies that have been made to look at that. And here you can see again that nuclear often takes a very big component of what you do. This would be a disastrous position to be in, taking all of the coal, using all of this as fossil fuel. So there's going to be an increase. That renaissance, as it's called, is going to occur, and it's going to keep on going, and the potential is there to provide the energy for 2050, and again, nuclear will have to be a big part of it. Now, what we've been doing in Britain, and this comes back to something that I think may be helpful here in South Africa, is we've been establishing a new nuclear power program. It had really run down. There'd been no build of a reactor for 25 years. Now, how have we gone about doing that? Well, it's been a slow process. The changed position of the government of the time occurred in about 2003, where they realized that they had to have nuclear power to meet, first of all, continuity of supply, and secondly, to conform with emissions standards that the UK government had agreed to. So the first comment I have to make to get a nuclear program well established is that you've got to have a well-informed, calm public debate at all levels about it. There is so much false information that runs around, and so many things that people don't realize about it or have misconceptions, that has to be dealt with, but you have to do it in a regular way and a repetitive way so people can't lapse back into false impressions. You've got to have, this discussion is going to be a reliable, evidence-based discussion. And there's particular areas where people have got to pay attention to, and that's in the area of safety, because the way in which you build reactors today and the design of them is intrinsically very safe. But people are worried, understandably, and they have to therefore be reassured and explained to why they are safe to operate. In fact, they're the safest form of electricity generation that there has ever been, right? But people don't always understand that. Second thing they have to understand is what the effects of radiation are. There's a complete misconceptions about this, so one has got to deal with them in a really rather calm and collected manner, and it takes a while for that to happen. And we've been doing that for last 10 years. And that's led to this popular support for a new nuclear build. There's clearly got to be a national, I think, energy policy, and I was rather pleased to see that from the previous speaker how clear that was in South Africa. I wished my own country, the United Kingdom, had such a clear policy. I and others have been arguing for that for a long while. The other thing that happens for nuclear power is that you've got to have, and we fortunately have got that in Britain already, and we've been strengthening it, you've got to have a statutory independent nuclear regulator. That means they have the last word on whether a plant is operated or not. What you're trying to do in all of this is build trust and confidence in the community that this is a very sensible plan to go forward with. So let me look at a national energy policy. You've seen one, this being shown by a gentleman previously to me. I want to emphasize, though, this is a long-term program. The role of nuclear energy in any such program, in any such policy, is going to lead you into basically a 100-year program. Basically because it takes 10 years to plan, license and construct nuclear reactors. There'll be a 60-year reactor lifetime, and then there'll be time where you're disposing of the fuel from those reactors. So this is a long-term commitment. But of course, along with the long-term commitment comes the long-term knowledge you're going to get a supply of energy that is reliable all through that length of time. But this leads to what is known as cradle-to-grave planning. So, what you need to do as a subset of your policy when you go in for a nuclear power renaissance, a new nuclear build, or an initial nuclear build, is you've got to have this long-term strategy, this energy policy in place. You need a long-term R&D roadmap in place for it, in particular, just as you need for other energy sources. You need to participate, because this is very much an international activity, in all of the international programs that are around, because you're not going to do everything yourself. You don't want that to have to do that. And then you want to also look at what the international arrangements are for the fuel cycle. Now, I stress there international. It is a very international subject and area of business. To demonstrate that, let me remind you that the international commercial activities are already established in mining, in enrichment and fabrication of fuel, and indeed now in power plant construction. And remember, when you come to do a power plant construction of most of the reactors that are talked about at the moment, these are gigawatts, 1 gigawatt to 1.6, 1.8 gigawatt reactors. They are massive investments. They're big capital investments. Unlike the previous speaker, where there was small capital investments and it could come in small units. To build a reactor takes a lot of capital investment. When you have to finish this exercise off and internationalize the fuel cycle, there are two areas which you're really worrying about and concerned about. One is the storage of the used fuel from the reactors and the disposal of it. And subsequently, if you move on to the new wave of reactors, what are called Generation 4 reactors, you're interested in the reprocessing that needs to be done with them. Those have to be addressed, and some of those carry various international issues. However, let me say immediately, there is international storage of fuel, spent used fuel from reactors, and there is international reprocessing. So actually that's already in existence. It needs to be appreciated more that it's there. People often worry about disposal of the used fuel from a reactor. It's what's called a geological disposal facility. Now, I think, again, this concerns people. There's waste that comes from these reactors, but I think what you need here is not necessarily a disposal facility when you start building your new reactors, but you must have a plan. You must have a plan to be able to deal with the waste that comes from it. And then finally, what are other things you need? You need to actually make sure that all of this is being conducted in a safe, secure, and a safeguarded way. The safety so that the plants are safe, the security so that terrorists can't get at them, and safeguards so that you can't get states that are causing or trying to use these as sources of proliferation of nuclear materials. Nowadays, this is addressed by having the 3 S's by design into any nuclear plans that you have or any nuclear plants. But it must be regulated. It must be checked that this is all the case. And in Britain, we've now put that under, it's all integrated under our national regulator, our Office of Nuclear Regulation. But more importantly, the 3 S's have got to be very much in the minds of the companies that build and operate any nuclear plants. And that means they have to have quite a lot of peer reviewing too, to make sure that those corporate responsibilities are actually being lived up to. So what's the current status in the UK? I've given you an outline of what you need for any new programme. Well, first of all, the public support is positive. And let me emphasise, it's taken at the order of 10 years. So here in South Africa, if one thinks one's going to begin a build in 2023, then there's just about 10 years to make sure you've got all of these things in place. What we did in Britain was also to change the approval process. Because these reactors that you're going to build, you want them to be basically the same as one another, so you gain economy from that manner. They set up a generic design approval process. So anybody wanting to build one of these reactors has to bring in a design that's then approved centrally by the government and by the regulators, particularly for that activity. That means once that generic design approval is given, there are 2 important aspects of that. One is it can't be challenged in any other licensing, any site licensing activity. And secondly, there's a clear plan for what you're going to build so that you don't then run into cost overruns and time overruns. Secondly, we've now got a proper site approval process in place. And I should say immediately that the sites where the new reactors are going to be built in Britain are in fact the sites where the old reactors are that are going to be closed down and decommissioned. So the population in that area are very familiar with these things and know that they have a good existence side by side with them. So that's cut out one of the other big issues. We've established this independent Office of Nuclear Regulation. We've set up a process and a consultation process for identifying a final repository. One of the other issues, because we have been reprocessing in Britain, is we have a lot of plutonium. There's now a plan to how to use that plutonium stockpile. In those costs I showed you, there was a contribution to a decommissioning fund, so that in these reactors reach the end of their lifetimes, there will be the fund there to decommission them. We've established just recently a nuclear R&D board to carry the responsibility for identifying the research and development that you need to keep going. So those are the things we have done. The remaining thing that is under negotiation at the moment, and is not an easy negotiation, is there has been a method set for agreeing prices. It's called the electricity market reform, and this is the final step before companies start to build reactors in Britain. So that, I'm not going to go into any detail. I'm not even privy to the discussions that are going on, but it's clearly going to be an important position, because the UK government takes the position that this has got to be a market activity, that they are not going to subsidise any of the costs. This is giving them some troubles, and because they do have a responsibility of ensuring that society has got energy. So that is a difficult spot, but it's alluded to in the previous speaker's talk, that sort of negotiation. The final statement about where we really are: there are two big companies that are going to start the build of reactors in Britain, we hope. The one most advanced is EDF, together with Areva, and this is to build EPR reactors. They've received the site license to build at Hinkley Point. This is where there are already 2 reactors which will be decommissioned in the future. The generic design approval for the EPR is just about to be approved, if not already approved. So that the whole planning permission is essentially complete. So the button is about to be pressed to be able to launch the build of those things, but it'll only be pressed when the financial arrangements are finalised and no longer under negotiation. So that was EDF, and they're in the lead in this activity at the moment. Hitachi have just bought one of the other, a company called Horizon, which owns some of the other reactors and reactor sites, in order to build reactors. And they are now starting the process of getting generic design approval for their advanced boiling water reactors in Britain, and will then take that through to get a full approval and start a build there. Now, each one of these reactors is a monumental investment in both money, people, and time. Each of them, they would like to be described as the cost of building the London Olympics. And that was a big undertaking. And in the end, it's something that turns up in the region of 8 to 10 billion or even more pounds per investment. So these are why this is the reason why the financial discussions are so important and so difficult. So, but now that Hitachi have begun, and they have already got some advanced boiling water reactors built and running, so they will be coming in very quickly to build. So I hope we have the chance of replacing our nuclear fleet, in fact increasing the amount of power generating behind. There was, I might add, when Hitachi bought Horizon, quite a lot of people around the world looking at this as a possibility, a way they would like to take forward their nuclear builds. So, in summary, I think the nuclear race is going to continue. The arguments are as good as they ever were, but you need to keep on making the arguments why it's as important as it is. In the energy mix, in the energy generation mix, it guarantees that nuclear part of that mix, guarantees that you've got a secure supply of carbon-free and cheap electricity, because when these reactors get to the 25-year period of life, you've paid off all the capital costs, and they are really giving you comparatively cheap electricity. And it is done in a safe and a secure manner. But you've got to keep everybody involved, both governments, industry, they have a major part in all of this, the regulators, and indeed the public on side. Thank you.